You're very small. We're trying to increase your size.
The ship food has been doing that for you.
Yeah. So you haven't been eating all that food?
No.
Hey.
You only get to eat 5.
There we go.
Okay, team. How do you want to run this, Chris? This is Chris and Christina somewhere off Western Chile. Clearly, it's not very stormy today because you look very sanguine. So,
yeah.
We've got your slideshow up on the other screen, Chris. We're unlikely to get the YouTubes going because it uses the same speaker system. But I'm standing by to change slides as you need. So over to you.
Okay.
Gary, one quick question. Are you able to pause us to move over to the YouTube, or is it just not an option? Because those are pretty useful for illustrating some key concepts.
I didn't get a positive look from the tech.
Okay.
All right, we'll continue.
But I can show them those afterwards. I can show them those afterwards, so we'll see if we've got time.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll just make sure there is time. So.
Okay, great, Gary. We'll take it away from here for a little bit. We have a really good view of the front row of the class, guys. So every now and again, as we move around the ship and show you different parts, we'll ask you, if you can hear us, and if you can give us a thumbs up, that would be great. So we can visually see that you guys are following along. Please do that. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Chris Moy. I'm the course coordinator for Geology 273-373. And this is Christina Riesselman.
Hi, I'm Christina Riesselman. I'm the course coordinator for Ocean 323. I don't know if we have any Ocean 323 students who snuck in for this lecture, but they should all be showing up to join you for your new lecture.
Great. So thanks for coming along. As you can see, we're out here in the margin of the Southern Ocean. Essentially, we're right off the coast of Chile. We've been out here for just about 8 weeks or so, sailing on IODP, or International Ocean Discovery Program Expedition 383. And so we've had a handful of scientific drilling sites in the Southern Ocean, and most recently, right up against the Chilean margin.
Would you like to show them on these maps?
Yeah, why not, I'll give you a little quick tour of where we are right now.
Yep, so we've got these monitors all over the ship that have some really good information. So if you decide which one to point at, I will then.
Sure, so why don't we go up top here? And so this is one of the video channels that we see throughout the ship, and you can see this circle here corresponds to our location. So we're just immediately west of Tierra del Fuego and southern Patagonia, so southernmost South America. And we've been here for about the last 5 days or so. We've been drilling a site that was very close to the Chilean margin, so close that we could actually see land. Our first time seeing land in over 8 weeks, and actually even smell a little bit of it as well, which is really nice. And we have about 10 days to go on our trip, and so we're arriving at our second site of the Chilean margin sites, and it's a site maybe 200 kilometers or so offshore. And we're going to begin drilling a series of holes down to about, let's say, 300 meters sediment depth. And the water column depth here is about 3,600 meters. So
should we take them back and do a little big picture?
So give you a bigger picture. And I'll speak to this a little bit more. We'll both speak to this as far as our overarching objectives towards maybe in about 10 minutes or so. But we've spent quite a bit of time out here, and what you're looking at here is the sea state, or the swell of the ocean on a 7-day model. And so obviously these purples and stuff that are here are some really, really high wave heights. I think those are going out to about maybe 6 to 8 meters or so. And, we're working in this general vicinity. We have 3 sites off Chile, and then we had 4 sites planned in this area of the Southern Ocean. And even by looking at this map for, a minute or so, you can see we're really kind of been in the main pathway for a lot of these storms. So it's been challenging drilling conditions, but overall it's been it's been quite successful in the material that we've recovered so far. You can see southern New Zealand here where you guys are presently at, and it looks like, you know, there might be something rolling in maybe later in the week or so. But I've also heard, talking to the ITS guys, that you guys have had a pretty mild winter so far, and one of the reasons is that all of the winds and all the storms have been funneled at this latitude, right where we've been working. So we've spent probably maybe 10 days to 2 weeks in total of this time kind of avoiding storms that have been in the Southern Ocean. Our overall objectives, very, very quickly here, is to reconstruct changes in the Antarctic circumpolar current using the sediments that have accumulated over time. And so we're targeting sediments that have accumulated over the last, say, 7 million years or so in multiple locations. And we're doing some things using, you know, principle or fundamentals of sedimentology to figure out how current strength has changed through time. And then we're employing a lot of different geochemical techniques to see how essentially the climate system in the Southern Hemisphere has changed over that same time period. So it's kind of very multidisciplinary. You'll see at this lecture and at the noon lecture, you'll meet a lot of our teammates that are on the team, and we'll show you some of the techniques that we're doing to analyze the sediments that we've recovered so far. You know, this is a scientific drilling ship that's used for scientific drilling expeditions, but it's also, you can think of it as a floating laboratory where we're collecting a lot of essential data. I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah. So I'd actually say this might be a good opportunity. So is there anybody in the classroom right now who's only taking Ocean 323 Marine Geology and Geophysics? If you are, put your hand high in the air for me. No, I didn't suspect many people who didn't have. Oh, we've got one! You're my favorite. You're officially my favorite. So for you, the next, I'm going to say like the next 5 minutes won't be applicable because Chris is going to introduce how sedimentology, so Geology 373-273 is going to run. And Gary's got a series of slides. As soon as he's done with that, we're going to take you outside. We'll have, so as Chris said, as you can tell, we're on a ship. You probably can't tell we're on a ship right now because the conditions are pretty calm and we're sitting in our planning space. So I'll give you a quick 360. We've got a window, we'll get you outside. Probably the coffee machine is coming into view now. Here's Cyan. Cyan is our outreach and education coordinator out here, and she's gonna be the person holding the video most of the time. Over here, we've got Brian. Brian is a documentary filmmaker, and he's gonna be following us along on today's tour. And they've been out here with us for the whole 2 months. And so what we'll do, Chris will introduce sedimentology, and then we will take you outside. We'll take a look at the rig floor. We'll make sure we leave. So we've just come on station about I don't know, 8 minutes ago. We heard the announcement over the PA system that we've just arrived at our next drill site. And so when we go outside, we should be able to see the drillers starting to assemble the drill pipe that we lower to the seafloor. So we'll look at them do that for a few minutes. And then we'll head downstairs. We'll give you a very quick peek at some of the other labs, and then we'll take you into the core describing area. And we'll spend most of this hour really digging deep into the sedimentology of some of the cores that we've collected. Then when you come back in at noon, we'll take you on a more extensive tour of the labs. We'll essentially follow you along the path that a sediment core would take as soon as it's retrieved from the seafloor. So we'll walk you through the entire core flow. And then after the noon lecture, or in the noon lecture, we'll leave you with lots of time at the end to ask questions. One of our primary objectives with this pair of lectures is to give you a feel for how, so you're just at the start of sedimentology. You're going to learn a lot of things about the processes that influence what kinds of sediments are deposited in different parts of the ocean. In marine geology, you'll learn things about the structure of the ocean basin. You'll learn about paleoceanography. You'll learn a little bit about nearshore processes, so the sorts of processes that operate close to where we are right now in these sort of marine marginal settings. And what we want to do at the start of the semester is to give you a really good feel for how scientists take the skills that you're about to learn and apply them to really important real world problems. So as you're going through the semester, if you start wondering why we're doing a thing, just think back to Chris and I out here on the ship and the sorts of things we're trying to achieve, and realize that when you have to memorize your Wentworth scale or think about, I don't know, how the Hjulstrom diagram tells you about flow velocity and particle distribution, that those are the very elements, the very skills, the very knowledge that we're using out here for these 8 weeks and that we'll use for the next decade to unlock the secrets in these cores. So Chris, with that, maybe Gary, do you want to cue up the PowerPoint introducing sedimentology?
I think it's up there. All right, gang. So again, I'll be the course coordinator for Geology 273-373, mostly teaching the class with James White, but Gary Wilson will be teaching this week, and Christina will be coming back later in the semester to talk about glacial geology and glacial sediments. So one of the reasons we're out here is that if you flip to the next slide, Gary. One of the reasons that we're out here is that we're trying to get a really good comprehensive understanding of how the Southern Ocean climate system and the adjoining cryosphere in the Antarctic continent has varied over time. And so to get that information and to get really continuous histories of those variations, we need to use sediment records to get at that. You know, the ice cores only go back 1 million years from the Antarctic. If we want to know about how the Antarctic cryosphere has developed over time, how biological productivity and the base of the food chain has changed over time, you know, these are fundamental things that drive climate around the planet. You know, this is the place to come. The Southern Ocean today is really doing just an amazing job drawing in a lot of the anthropogenic CO2 that's being produced right now, and we need to understand how that system works over long time scales. And we'll come back to this when we go down and look at some of the sediments we've been collecting so far. But one of the things that we can do as sedimentologists is go back in time, and we're in our time machine right now, and get a sense of, you know, we can go back to these warmer worlds like the interglacials, previous interglacials, or previous warm periods. You can evaluate how strong the Antarctic circumpolar current was, or how strong the carbon sink was. So these are fundamental things that we can do as sedimentologists. So understanding about how the Earth system works over long periods of time, and kind of drawing out that record of climate change. So next slide. So this class will really build on a lot of the fundamentals that you guys have already experienced as Otago Geology students. So I spoke to you as first-year students in Geology 112, and I provided this kind of source-to-sink overview of sediments and sedimentary rocks, essentially how we initially weather, erode, and transport materials to basins where they accumulate over time. We talked about a little bit about some of the fundamentals of how sediment is moved by either wind or water or by glaciers and gravity. And we talked a little bit about the characteristics of sediments in different depositional environments. So that was kind of some of the fundamentals. We even went on a field trip together to Brighton, and we looked at the Dunedin sedimentary sequence. And so you learned a little bit about how you can take a stratigraphic sequence and interpret some of the changes that have taken place over time. And if you're coming into this class from an international, from a different program, you know, you should have experienced something similar to that in your first-year geology classes, and that's one of the prerequisites for this paper. As second-year Otago geology students, you would have been taken out to the field during the field camps to Borland and to Marifenua, and you would have been taught how to describe sedimentary rocks in the field and collect data and maybe even write about them in a basic way. And then in Geology 251, you would have been able to, you know, maybe think a little bit more about sediment classification and what some of the key minerals look like under microscopes. And so this class will kind of build upon some of those basics that you've learned in first and second year, right? And we can break down this course into 4 fundamental elements. The first is kind of learning a little bit more about the fundamental processes in the way we move sediment around and eventually deposit it in different locations. And so that's the first element. Second, we want to learn a lot more about the different depositional environments where sediments are either temporarily stored or stored for really long periods of time. And so these are environments like lakes or maybe proximal glacial environments, the different types of sediment patterns that we get on the continental shelf, and then ultimately out into the deeper ocean. And so that's a second element of this class. A third is the tools for sedimentary investigations. We'll give you a little bit of a highlight of what we do here on the boat, but you know, at Otago, we have this great strength, this great research strength in using sediments to look at past climate, environmental, as well as tectonic change. And so you'll be exposed to some of the facilities that we have here on campus to undertake those investigations. So there's about maybe 5 faculty here that have a really strong research interest in this area. And then finally, we'll talk about the indirect as well as direct controls on sedimentation. So direct controls like currents, wave action, stream or fluvial velocities on deposition of sediments, and then also the indirect controls such as sea level change, climate change, as well as tectonic controls. So that's how we build from what you guys have already gone through. So next slide, you'll see a little bit of an overview. These documents or a calendar of the different topics, these are posted on Blackboard so you can look at them on your own time. Essentially, items 1, 2, and 4 are being taught in the beginning of the class before the mid-semester break. Elements 3 and 4 are after that. There are a couple of key things that you want to keep in mind and put them in your planners or your phones or wherever you use right away, is that there's 2 in-class exams. The first is on August 13th at 8 a.m. and the second is September 17th at noon. So we'll mix those around, but those are important things to keep in mind. On the second slide that shows off the calendar, another series of dates that are really important to keep in mind is a field trip, and that's going to be on the weekend of September 7th. It's going to be September 7th and 8th. So that's a local day-long field trip, so 2 individual days, and we'll structure that around the weather at the time. If you go to the next slide, you'll see how the assessment is broken down. Essentially 50 internal, 50 final exam. So you'll have a sense of what that's like. The 2 key bits are the internal exams that I just spoke about. We'll also have 5 Blackboard quizzes. The schedule and the syllabus document on Blackboard will outline where they are. Those are Blackboard quizzes, and those will be kind of centered essentially on the readings that you guys will have to do throughout the semester. And so there's a list and a schedule up on Blackboard when those occur. I think you're still a couple of weeks from now, and I'll email you some more details about that. From my colleague here, Cyan, we're going to do something a little bit different. And we're going to actually do a screencast project, and that will be due in late August. And I'll give you some more info on that when I return in a couple weeks' time. We'll also have a group project that's based on the field trip. So field trip attendance is mandatory, and because it feeds directly into this project, that's worth 15% of your grade. Okay, next slide. The textbook is a textbook called Sedimentology and Stratigraphy by Nichols. I chose it because it's available online, and the bookstore also carries it. So there's no excuse for not having access to that content. We also have a handful of books. You can see the titles there. They're on reserve at the Science Library. Those will be beneficial for additional reading, as well as for work on your project later in the term. Next slide. Fieldwork, again, is going to be on September 7th and 8th. Those 2 days will be out for about 4 or 5 hours at a time, and it's going to be coastal, so it will be really tide dependent. And so that's why they're shorter periods of time over 2 days. And so results from that work will be incorporated into a poster project at the very end of the term. All right, next slide. I know I'm going through things quickly, but you have all this information, and I want to show you what's going on over here on the boat. You can see the teaching team. James will be back in a few weeks' time. Gary will be leading the next set of lectures in the laboratory next week. And then again, Christina will come later in the term. The schedule outlines the lectures and the topics and things like that. Okay, let's see. If there are any immediate questions, how about you email me, and then I'll address them over by the end of the week. Unless there's anything like critical right now that I should explain.
No,
okay, think about it. Okay, think about, if you don't have one now, write it down, and we can address it at the noon lecture as well. Okay, great. So next slide, you'll get a sense of our. You should see a map of South America, mostly in the adjacent ocean next to it, and a little bit of an overview of our cruise here, or scientific expedition that we're a part of. So IODP Expedition 383, Dynapack. So we're looking at the dynamics of the Pacific Antarctic Circumpolar Current. you know, this is a kind of a special cruise in that the boat that we're on, the JOIDES Resolution, will be completing a series of maybe 6, 7 expeditions in the Southern Ocean. And so after this, it will actually be sailing north along the Chilean margin and kind of back into the Central Pacific and then eventually out into the Atlantic Basin. And so, you know, New Zealand is a participant in this IODP program. And, you know, we're a relatively small group here in New Zealand, but, you know, we pack a pretty big punch, and we've had scientists sailing on pretty much all of those expeditions into the Southern Ocean. You know, whether it was work looking at the Antarctic continental margin or in the Amazon Sea, or other localities in and around New Zealand over these last probably year and a half or so. So we've taken some great advantage of it, and so this cruise kind of concludes the Southern Ocean kind of series of cruises, and we're really interested in seeing how the Antarctic circumpolar current has changed over time. We're interested in looking at how sea surface temperature in this region and perhaps how it's influenced by the Antarctic continent has changed over time. And we're also interested in how terrigenous material derived from Chile is transported to these proximal basins close to the Chilean continental margin.
I'm gonna interject for a couple of minutes to say that the ship is about to leave the Pacific Basin, but it's only leaving temporarily. So the schedule suggests that it might be back in the Pacific in 2023 and might be drilling again around the Southern Ocean in that time frame. And we have, so this expedition right now, we're probably 30% senior scientists, so academics who work at universities. We're probably 30% postdoctoral scholars, and then the rest of the people on the ship are PhD students, and we even have a master's student out here. So if you guys are looking to the future and over the course of the semester you discover that that these are ideas that are really exciting for you, there are opportunities that track perfectly with your trajectory out of your undergraduate program and into a PhD or into a postdoc opportunity, where the timing would suit really nicely to be on this ship your very own selves the next time it comes back into the Pacific. So just put that in the back of your mind as we take you on a tour. You can imagine yourselves right here where we are doing this work.
Cool. Next slide, Gary. So there you can kind of get an overview of the southern hemisphere and the high latitudes and the mid latitudes. The key thing I want to point out is that coloring in the map. Those yellows and reds those are the really fast currents that are associated with the Antarctic circumpolar current. This is a really important current system, and we'll kind of draw back to this current system later in the semester. But it's really fast flowing. It's a really thick current, so it goes all the way from the surface all the way down to maybe 3,600 meters water depth, where we're drilling right now and where we have been drilling in the central South Pacific. And so this big kind of current mass is capable of actually transporting very, very fine grains, very fine silts. And so we can look at that past variation by looking at the sediments that are incorporated in the cores that we've collected. This rate of current circulation is really important for mixing water from all the ocean basins. And again, it's a really big player in the global climate system. Now, in those central South Pacific sites, next slide, you can see some of those. They're listed as CSP1A, CSP3. That's where we essentially came from, where we spent a majority of our time over the last month. And these are pelagic basins, right? They are located thousands of kilometers from any land. We actually pass by what's known as Point Nemo, which is the place on the surface of the ocean, which is essentially the farthest point from any coastline on the planet. So it's really remote work, and what we're hoping to find in some of these cores is actually evidence of dust that's being derived from Australia as well as in New Zealand during the glacial periods. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important later on in the year when we talk about pelagic basins and the carbon cycle. Okay, done enough chatting. We're going to give you a tour. What we're going to do is we're going to take you out to the rig floor and then also down into the sedimentology lab on the boat. So bear with us here as we get ready. Yes.
All right, so when we get outside, it's going to be pretty noisy. The ship overall is a noisy place, so we may not be able to hear you very well. We will describe a little bit for you what's happening on the rig floor when we get outside, And then we'll try to end up early enough that Gary can play. There are a couple of 1-minute videos. So one about how the derrick works and one about how the coring system operates. And those 1-minute videos will give you a peek at the things that you can't actually see when you're looking at the rig standing here on the catwalk. So we'll take you out, we'll take a peek over the rig, and then we'll essentially go down a set of stairs, follow the path that the core would take into the labs. We won't linger on that now. We'll really focus on that when we get to the noon lecture. And then we'll pop you right into the sedimentology lab where Chris has his team lined up to show you how sedimentologists handle a core when it comes on the JOIDES Resolution.
All right.
So Chris,
here we
take
go.
us out the door.
Here we go. All right, here we go. Perfect timing too. All right, everyone. So we arrived on site. What we've done is we've dropped our thrusters that extend into the water that are controlled by our dynamic positioning system. So essentially, we're stationary over our site right now. So you can see the workers, we stopped literally like 15 minutes ago, and they're already at work putting what's called the bottom hole assembly together. So the drill bit is already underneath that little hole in the floor that you can see right here. The yellow hangers that are coming down from up above, that's the top drive. So that actually extends, that can actually raise and lower the whole drill string or the drill pipe down to the seafloor. The red bit of equipment that you see on the back is our pipe racker. And so behind us, we essentially store over 6,000 meters of drill pipe. And that's what these guys are going to be able to assemble here over the next 11 or 12 hours. That's how long it's going to take for them to assemble essentially 3,800 meters of pipe, so it goes down all the way to the seafloor below. So you can see a couple of our drillers there. In the back, in the white shed, what they call the doghouse, you can see one of our drillers potentially, and there's a guy up in the top there that's controlling the pipe racking system. And so what you're seeing come out of that pipe racker pretty soon, let's see, I just saw it coming forward here, it's a bit of the bottom hole assembly. Let's see if it comes out here. So that's the very, very kind of end of what's called the drill string. And so again, the drill bit is going to be already kind of down below. It's already poking into the floor there, but that's essentially what they're building right now. And again, about 10 hours from now, we'll be down at the seafloor ready to drill.
Yeah, so we'll pop back out here when we connect up with you at noon. And by noon, we should be into the process of lowering the actual drill string. So this bottom hole assembly that you see has a diameter of maybe 25 centimeters, something like that. And the actual the drill pipe is a little bit narrower diameter. So when we come back out here, there should be good lights on the rig floor because it'll be dark by that time. It's going to get dark here in about an hour and a half. But there's really good illumination on the drill floor when these guys are working. So we should be able to get a view of how this is progressing. So these pieces of bottom hole assembly are about, looks like they might be sort of 15 meters long. Once we get to tripping the actual drill pipe, it gets tripped in 30-meter stands. So they're 10-meter pieces of pipe that the guys pre-assemble into 30-meter units, and then they can extend 30 meters at a go once the bottom hole assembly is. And the videos that Gary will show you either at the end of this lecture or at the very start of the next one, those will show you how it actually deploys down through the rig floor. So watch this for maybe another 30 seconds, and then we'll take you down these stairs and inside, and we can talk a little bit about what we get out of this once it's all assembled. All right, guys, we're going to take you downstairs now. We'll peek through the door, and then we'll head into the labs, and we'll end up in the sedimentology area.
you can get a quick view of the rig floor here. So again, they're in the process of assembling our parts and everything. And over here, you can see these metal pipes that are kind of being held vertically over here. This is actually the coring tool that we'll use to obtain 9.5 meter long sections of mud from the seafloor and from below. And so essentially that pipe, that narrow diameter pipe will be passed through that large drill pipe that you're seeing being assembled, and it will actually go all the way down to the seafloor on a wire line, and it will be injected into the mud. And then we'll drill down another 10 meters or so, and then inject the next 10 meter long core barrel. Inside that middle tube,
so here you can see more of that bottom hole assembly just waiting to be pulled up. There's this bottom hole assembly that's waiting to be pulled up and dropped through the rig floor, and you can sort of compare the diameter of the bottom hole assembly here with the diameter of the small pipes over there.
So just real quick here, this is the core liner. So you can see we're going down even to an inner diameter here, or smaller diameter, and this is what fits in those metal pipes over there that's hanging vertically. Each of these sections are about 9.5 meters long. So the drillers will tell us when there's core on deck, and we'll have the techs take that 9.5 meter long core barrel, bring it into here, and we'll talk more about this later.
So we'll tell you more about what happens out here when we get together at noon. Now we're going to take you, so the core will pass through this space, the techs deal with it, and then it goes in through this door. And you can see the ocean right out there, right? So it's sort of a murky day out. But even if it weren't murky, you would just see horizon as far as the eye can see, with the crane shack out there. And then sort of lifeboats right up on the top. We've got 4 lifeboats on the ship that have space theoretically for 280 people. So, good dancing.
All right, here we go. So we're coming into the sediment labs here, or into the core labs here. We'll give you a more comprehensive tour at noon. If you follow me. So this is where the core of the this is the core of the sedimentology lab, and the main aspect here of what's going on. And all those guys good? You guys can still hear us okay? Awesome. Okay. Again, we'll give you a better idea of the core flow at noon, but what essentially happens. Now let's keep going because we have 10 more minutes. So what happens is those cores eventually get split after they go through our different sensors or systems, and half of that core lands right here on the description table. And so if you guys turn around here, we have our sedimentology team here. So there's 8 of us in total. We work 4 at a time. We work 12-hour shifts. On your left, we have Julia from Columbia University in New York. We have Lee from Taiwan University. And also, but currently based in China, is that right? And then we have Shinya as well, currently based at Jamstec. Yes, in Japan. And so the 4 of us have been going through, and we've been describing essentially half the core. I feel like yesterday maybe we did a little bit more than half. So we did, and we've collected a lot of core on this cruise. I think we're easily over about 2,500, approaching 3,000 meters. And we're going to collect probably easily another 1,000 meters of mud over the next 5 or 6 days or so. And so this core lands on our deck, and we employ some of the techniques that you've already learned as sedimentologists in first year geology. We have things like hand lenses to look at grain size of the sediment. We have grain size comparator cards, very similar to the ones that you might have seen on Geology 252 field trips, right? Or in the 112 labs as well. We even have a little acid bottle here to see if any of our sediments that we're looking at have calcium carbonate in them. And so we have a set of tools, and our job here is to essentially describe all the sediment that comes up. We have the these handy description sheets or barrel sheets. And we're essentially at centimeter scale, we're looking at the changes that have taken place down in each of these core intervals. So over here on the description table, you see 7 sections, and this corresponds to 1 9.5 meter core, more or less, that have been taken out of our last site. And so this is a really cool this is a really interesting sediment core here. We have, if you go from the right-hand side and work your way successively or progressively to the left, we're getting towards the top of the core. So the very top of this particular core is up here, and then the very bottom is over here. And so we're looking at a section of core that, from other work that's been done in the region, captures this really interesting interval of time. So this very light-colored sediment that you see here is actually really, really rich in carbonate. And the primary constituent in that sediment are calcareous nanofossils, essentially coccolithophores that are the main kind of constituent in this particular section of core, and that's giving it this very, very bright color or white color in the sediment. And then on either side of that, you can see that the sediment looks quite different. Not only is the color different, but even the texture is quite different. So here we are actually describing many of these sediments here as essentially clayey silts. So very fine-grained material. If you look closely right here, where I'm poking, and then what's going to be a lot easier to see is this material over here. These are actual rocks or drop stones that are recovered in our sediment cores. And so, as a first-order interpretation, we're working off the coast of the Chilean margin. At this particular site, we were maybe, 50 kilometers or so away. These represent drop stones derived from icebergs passing over our site, and that they have been essentially kind of delivered by the Patagonian ice sheet. And so one of the things that we can do in these cores is look at that kind of variability in the Patagonian ice sheet over periods of time. Over here, when we get into this more carbonate-rich intervals, this is an interval of time that is ascribed to an interglacial, and this is actually marine isotope stage 11. And so it's about 400,000 years or so ago. And this is one of the, these are one of the potential analogs for future change, right? This is one of these really warm interglacials of the last million years or so. And you might get a sense from looking at it on the screen here is that this actually is relatively somewhat coarser, this material. And we actually have a lot of foraminifera and a lot of coarser material in this because the currents are very, very strong at that time. Okay, so yes, we're gonna come in here. I wanna introduce and have you guys see a little bit more about what some of the SED team does here. And so this is Julia. Again, Julia is based at Columbia University in New York City, and she's going to tell you some of the things that she's been involved with, both research-wise as well as like here out on the ship.
Hey guys, it's very glad to meet you all. I'm German. I did my undergrad in Bremen, which is a North German city. I studied geosciences and marine geosciences, and then I did a few adventures in England and in Switzerland before I actually moved to New York, where I'm actually now based and do a postdoc at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. The reason why I'm here is essentially I am very interested in studying past interglacial climates that are warmer than today, essentially, that represent a time in the past that are warmer and, let's say, more extreme than today. And this is actually one example of such a time, of such a sediment that we have. So we call this interval stage 11. You don't have to bother why we do that, but it's a very particular interval. So the temperature at that time, the global temperature was about 1 to 3 degrees warmer at that time, and the sea level was also a little bit higher. And I have sort of prepared a very high-tech slide for you. So this is different ice core records. So this is the ice phase. So these are water isotope changes in the ice core that represents the time that our sediment cores on the table represent. And then we also have the gas phase in the ice cores, and you see essentially the carbon dioxide concentrations from the glacial into our interglacial. So this is really the interglacial CO2 concentration in the atmosphere at that time. And you already see that the atmospheric CO2 concentrations are around 280 ppm, which is actually a lot lower than what we have. But so you see, these curves essentially represent a change from the glacial to the interglacial and a lot of small scale, millennial scale variability. And if I go to my next slide, you actually see an image of our sediment core that's on the table right now. I've squeezed and squished it a little bit so that it fits. And what you see here is a record of magnetic susceptibility that we obtained with one of our instruments on board, the SCHMISL, the so-called SCHMISL, the section half multi-sensor logger. And what you see is essentially magnetic susceptibility. So how magnetic is the sediment if you apply a magnetic field to it? And you see that we have high values in the silty clay, dark sediment, but then low values in those lighter nanofossil ooze sediment. Okay, but then if you compare our sediment data against depth versus the ice core data, the climate data versus age, you already see that there's such a great agreement between them without actually tuning. You see low values here, you see the onset of the interglacial with this onset event, you see the interglacial plateau in both records, and then you see these millennial scale events during the glacial inceptions as well. So our sediment, essentially, the take-home message is our sediment represents the climate records that we see around the world in Antarctic ice cores, in the equatorial regions, and that's why it's so important to study those sediments. Yeah, that's actually my message for you. It's really exciting to have this on the table and study those sediments.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julia. That's fantastic.
We have 3 minutes.
3 minutes left in total. Okay. So what we're going to do is, I think we're going to, this might be a good time to pause, and then what we'll do at noon is that we'll return and we'll show you a little bit more about the sedimentology lab and some of the instruments. You'll meet and talk to a few more of our colleagues here that are working right now. So we'll see you guys again at noon, but this might be a good opportunity for any questions that you guys might have.
Should we go into a quiet corner?
Sure.
Yeah. So if you can pass a microphone, Gary, go somewhere quiet.
I'm getting smiling and shaking heads. They don't have any questions.
A little prelude to what Gary's going to be talking about next week. Gary's going to talk to you and have you think a little bit more about sedimentary facies. And you can see this is our sedimentology nook, and we've kind of placed a lot of things on our blackboards here on our backboard. You know, we've had a talent show while we've been out here on the ship to kind of you know, pass the time, especially when we're running from weather. We've also had a ping pong tournament here, and so Shinya has made it to the finals, and so we were rooting him on as well. But you can also see here is that we have a lot of these sheets here where we're characterizing our sedimentary facies, and this is something that Gary will talk about. You know, we're looking at a lot of fine-grained sediments. It doesn't make sense to classify these as mudstones or sandstones or, you know, just because it's all very, very fine. We want to get at some of the key processes that are different down the stratigraphic sequence. And so Gary will talk about that next week, next Tuesday. So questions, do you guys have any? I know the turnaround time on the room is quite short. So
so what if we, I think you guys have about 2 minutes to go. Gary, what if we leave you to play a couple of those videos, maybe the core drilling video and the derrick video, so you can get a feel for how that drilling works. And then we'll see you again at noon. At noon, we'll give you a look back. Hopefully there'll be tripping pipe. And then we'll bring you back into the sedimentology lab where you'll talk to Lee and Shinya about some of the other physical properties and the imaging analysis we do. And then we'll take you into the biostratigraphy area, down to geochemistry, and you'll get a feel for really how we extract climate signals, how we tell time in these cores, and how we get our first order climate interpretations, even while we're already or just still here on the moon. That sound good to you guys?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
I'll see you at noon.
3 hours.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Toodaloo.